Cash damming is the process of essentially converting your non-tax deductible debt, so the debt on your primary residence, right, your regular primary residence mortgage, non-tax deductible, and converting it into a tax deductible loan.
So you don't necessarily need to have a separate rental property to do this strategy.
This strategy is helping you pay off your bad debt. So
Right.
if you have a big old mortgage or even $100,000, whatever it is, it's always a benefit to investors to get rid of that bad debt as quickly as possible.
I have a property and I don't have any line of credits or anything on it.
Yeah.
So you would come to me and I said, listen, I want to buy an investment property.
Yeah.
Just walk us through step by step how this process would look like
Yeah.
for someone who hasn't done it before. So cash damming, it's something that not a lot of people know about, but it's great for those who have an investment property. Today we're gonna have Zac explain to us how cash damming works and how investors can use it to their advantage. So Zac, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Zac is a great mortgage broker. We've had him on a few times in NK Real Talks. He's just one of the best that I know in the industry that comes up with the best strategies, especially for the investors. So today we're going to talk about cash damming. So just tell us high level, what's a cash damming?
All right. So cash damming is, first, thanks for having me again. I think this is my third celebrity guest appearance on the show.
I love it. You were the first that we ever had on our webinars. Back then was called the webinar. Now it's called NK Real Talk.
Yeah,
So
awesome.
the
OG, yeah, there you go.
Guys, if you're finding this useful, be sure to click that subscribe, share it with your friends, and hit that like. Let's continue.
Cash damming is the process of essentially converting your non-tax deductible debt, so the debt on your primary residence, right, your regular primary residence mortgage, non-tax deductible, and converting it into a tax deductible loan. Right. So most investors, understand you use a mortgage to buy a rental property. That interest on that mortgage is tax deductible. So that's actually good debt. Right. A lot of people consider, I used a mortgage to buy a property, so it's good debt. But the debt on your primary is non-tax deductible, so it's still considered bad debt. Right. In the process of cash damming, we're converting that non-tax deductible debt into tax deductible debt.
Okay. And let's dive a little bit deeper into it. So let's assume I have a property and I don't have any line of credits or anything on it.
Yeah.
So you would come to me and I said, listen, I want to buy an investment property.
Yeah.
Just walk us through step by step how this process would look like for someone who hasn't done it before.
For sure. So if you either want to buy an investment property or you already own an investment property, right, the process is this. You have to have a mortgage on your primary residence that has a readvanceable line of credit. That's first step. So you have to have at least enough equity in your property, which is 20% equity in the property. We can have a line of credit that's even just for starting balance of $10,000. It can be very small because it's going to be auto readvancing. That means as you pay the mortgage down, the limit on the line of credit continues to increase. You pay it down by $2,000, you have another available $2,000 to borrow back into the home. Okay. And then you can, if you have the down payment yourself, you can go just use that, buy an investment property. If you need to pull some equity out of your property to get the down payment, you can do so. If you already own the investment property, great, but you have to have that mortgage set up.
So just while we're here, if you refinance your principal rest, the interest on that, you can still write it off.
It is, exactly. That's tax deductible. So I would suggest in that case, right, that you be very clear, because a lot of this strategy, it's a tax and mortgage strategy, right?
Yeah.
So you need to make sure that everything is very clear. What is that non-tax to tax deductible portion? Because you don't want to get screwed by the CRA down the line. They audit you and you haven't done things by the book. So if you were doing that, I do suggest you take say you've got a $500,000 regular mortgage right now. You want to take $100,000 out to buy an investment property. You segment it into another $100,000 portion of the mortgage. And there's lots of banks and lenders out there will allow multiple components on your mortgage. So you keep the non-tax deductible, $500,000. You take $100,000 out that is tax deductible. You can use that as a down payment. But then you also need to set up that home equity line of credit portion. And the way that the cash damming structure works, the actual cash damming portion, is that you take the rental income from the rental property that you receive every month once you have it, and instead of paying the expenses on the rental property with that income, which most people are taught to do, right? Set up a separate bank account, take your rental income, pay your expenses. We're going to take the rental income, use that to prepay down your primary residence mortgage every month. So you have prepayment privileges. Say you get $2,000 in rent, you're going to make your regular mortgage payment, and you're going to add $2,000 on top of that. Because once you receive rental income, it's your money to do with whatever you want, right? A lot of people think I have to pay the expenses. No, it's just income. You've received it. There's no rule or anything that says you have to utilize that for the purposes of the expenses. So use that to prepay down the mortgage. Then that readvanceable line of credit that we set up, we're going to pull money out of that into an account to pay all the expenses on the rental property, right? So the mortgage payment, condo fees, maintenance, property taxes, that creates a tax deductible loan cycle because now the money you've borrowed out of that home equity line is now tax deductible, and you're converting the mortgage slowly every month, or quickly in some cases, depending on how much income and expenses you have, from non-tax deductible into tax deductible debt.
So a couple of questions, a little bit technical. I mean, might have to talk to an accountant, but you may know it. So that payment that you're making towards the mortgage, would a percentage of it be counted as like a business income or something because, you know, you got 100,000 that you used to purchase that investment property, or no?
So the 100,000 that you're pulling out is debt, right? Yeah. So there's no you pull that out, it's not income. You use it, so it's there's no tax implication.
The monthly payment that you're putting back into it.
Oh yeah, so that's the same thing, right? It's rental income. So the rental income and the rental expenses are still classified. You still categorize that on your tax refunds or your tax returns in that whole section of your T1, right? Of how you dictate your taxes. This is just creating a separate sort of investment line of credit. Because the tax rule is any money used to invest in Canada for the purposes of generating income is tax deductible. So what you're doing by moving the money to the line is creating tax deductible debt that you've used to invest in your own landlord business that's generating income, right?
Interesting.
So it's a separate thing. It doesn't have to do really with the rental expenses. And then based on your marginal tax rate from your job, if you're self-employed or employed, whatever it is, whatever your marginal tax rate is, that's the amount of sort of refund that you'll receive off the interest portion of the line of credit.
Perfect. What if that line of credit, or what if you're short on the payments? Let's just call it like the mortgage payment, insurance, and etc. doesn't get covered. Like the line is not enough. Doesn't have enough room for that.
Right. So the line, if set up correctly, and that auto readvancing feature should always be enough to cover, right? Because you're paying it down. You're paying down the extra prepayment plus your regular mortgage payment, which is going to have, say, it's a $3,000 payment. You're paying down $1,000 towards the principal. So there's always going to be enough room. And to that point, because this is a big question that comes up a lot, is like, how is the interest then paid, right, on the line of credit? We account for that in the calculation, right? That each month you're actually going to pull a little bit of money extra from that line of credit to cover the minimum interest payment on the line of credit itself. And there's always going to be enough room to do that. So essentially you do that until the debt is fully converted, right? Until you've taken that full non-taxable portion and slowly month after month after month move it over to the line. The line is increasing, but your mortgage is decreasing faster than that. So your debt's always going to be going down in this scenario. People have that mindset that, well, I don't want this infinitely amortizing line of credit. It's not. It's still going down faster than it would have been if you were regularly just paying down your mortgage, because you're also receiving tax refunds every year that we're going to hammer towards the prepayment of the mortgage as well, right? That's what we're going to do in order to really reduce the overall amortization of the mortgage from 30 years that you had originally down to 20 or 15 in some cases for people. We're using those tax refunds to additionally pay down the mortgage faster.
Perfect. So you can use, so you don't necessarily need to have a separate rental property to do this strategy.
No, that's, you can do this with, a basement suite, additional dwelling unit. That becomes a little bit more complex, not impossible, but you'd want to, the same way that we would take your regular mortgage and split it into a different component for a down payment, let's say, on another property, we would split it into the percentage of the home that is the rental component,
based
right?
on the square footage?
Exactly. So we take the square footage, say it's 30% of the property is a rental component. You get $1 million mortgage. Well, the first step, we're going to do $700,000 non-tax deductible, $300,000 that's already tax deductible because it's the rental portion, and then add on a line of credit so we can just cycle the same thing. Then we're going to work on paying down that $700,000 and leave the $300,000 to continue to pay because it's already good debt, right? We want to get rid of the bad debt in this scenario the fastest.
So another question would be, let's say if someone's got the entire property paid off, and then you refinance to get a whole, let's say, get $1 million line of credit. You can use that whole thing as a tax deductible, right?
Yeah, exactly. Like if you're this strategy is helping you pay off your bad debt. So if you have a big old mortgage or even $100,000, whatever it is, it's always a benefit to investors to get rid of that bad debt as quickly as possible. I like to use the analogy sometimes, like, you've got two properties, right? They both have mortgages on them, primary and a rental, but the rental's more like if you have consumer debt and you've got a bunch of credit card debt and line of credit debt. Well, you want to get rid of the line of credit card debt before you start paying off the line of credit, because there's just more interest on that, right? But if you have a fully paid off home, then you've already achieved this goal. The cash damming might not be for you. Now there's other things you can do because you've got a bunch of equity sitting there. So why not take some out? And as long as you're using it for the same purposes of investing to generate income in some way, the interest is tax deductible.
Interesting. So who do you find that is your typical, let's say, client or profile that takes advantage of something like this?
Yeah, so I have a lot of people that reach out that have at least one investment property, right, already. Like I do some deals with people that want to buy their first investment property, but they're probably not looking into like optimization at that point. They're just sort of looking to how to buy their first investment. And then I'll bring it up and say, hey, this is great. But I see a lot of people reach out that have 1 to 3 investment properties, but they also have this jumbo loan on their primary. Like I get a lot of people that are like, we've got a $900,000, $800,000 mortgage on my primary with no end in sight, and they know that they're going to pay double that basically over 25 or 30 years on an $800,000 mortgage. You're pretty much going to pay 1.5, 1.6 million, depending on the interest rate over that time period. And we can get in the true cost of a mortgage in a second, but that's sort of the client that I see reaching out the most, is that they see this strategy and they say, how can I implement this to get rid of this big debt that I have, and that they have some equity. So they know that they can kind of do this, and they can see, well, this sort of makes sense for me. I can get a line of credit. I've got an investment property. How do I do this? So those are the people. 1 to 3 investment properties. I find that if it's someone that has more investment properties than that, they've probably already figured this out. Whether they did it on purpose or not, they've kind of moved equity around and they've paid off the primary first. But that's sort of the most typical clients.
Interesting. And do you see, like, once the principal res component is out of the question, then that's it? Like, you can't, like, if the principal res is paid off to a certain point, like
yeah, and then it goes back to kind of what you were saying before. It's like, well, how do we use the equity now? Well, you've achieved the goal of either paying the mortgage off entirely, and that's great. Maybe you just want to keep it that way and have more cash flow for a day-to-day purposes, or how do we tap into the equity now? You've got a $2 million home here, definitely in the GTA or Toronto, right? Like that's the size of the price of homes, and all this equity sitting in there. How do we utilize it? Because at the end of the day, if you pull even a couple $100,000 out to do something with, the true cost of that interest, if it's tax deductible and you're in a 40 to 50% tax bracket, you're not paying 5% interest. You're really paying 2.5 because you're getting half of that back in tax.
And what would be the strategy if someone is paid off? Would you recommend them getting a home line or refinance at a lower rate and then use that money somewhere else?
Yeah, it does depend on sort of what their goals are, what the returns are going to be, how quickly they want to pay off that debt. Like, a lot of people, depending on your investment mindset or risk tolerance per se, is it like, do we want to be able to just pay this off in full with some return? Is it a short-term kind of investment? Is it long-term and I'm not going to be able to pay it back anyway for 20 or 25 years? Let's just amortize this loan and ride out the tax deductible interest. So it's really kind of a case by case, I'd say, what you want to do with those funds.
Okay, so it depends on their situation.
Yeah.
So how much is an average investor saving using this strategy on average?
Oh man, it's crazy when you put the numbers down. Like, I know we're just talking kind of hypothetically here, but even someone with, especially if you have a $1 million, $800,000 mortgage, like we were talking about before, you got an $800,000 mortgage that you're going to pay for 25 or 30 years. So it's going to cost you, say, 1.6 million. But that's not even the true cost of that mortgage, right? Because that $800,000 mortgage, it's going to cost you 1.6. But if you're in the highest tax bracket, which you probably are, to be able to, afford a mortgage of that or obtain a mortgage like that, you're getting taxed at 40 to 50%, which means you need to exactly. So now you have to go out earn your income, get taxed, then pay. So that $800,000 mortgage is costing you $3 million in money you have to earn, right? So if we're able to execute this cash damming strategy for their particular situation, and we're able to shave 10 years off their mortgage, well, that could be, $900,000 of pre-tax income savings.
Right.
And that's some of the numbers I put together. Depending on how much rental income and what the expenses are and the cash flow, that's why I can't give you a definitive answer. But some people, I put it together, and it's like $1.5 million in savings.
Right.
Because we're paying that mortgage off in half the time with the strategy that was going to cost you $3.2 million in gross income you had to earn, right? So the savings are just astronomical when you start doing the math.
And would this work for Airbnb properties?
Yeah. So as long as the only thing about doing it with short-term rentals, Airbnb, depending on where your property is, right, is, and I'm sure better than most about all the regulation and rules and changing things that are happening out there. So the risk would be if you're operating it illegally, right, or not totally by the book, or they change the regulation and now all of a sudden you can't keep generating that rental income. It could potentially stop the process from working, right? So as long as you're above board with it and everything is you're operating correctly, then 100% you can use short-term rental, cottage rental property income. You can use that, anything like that.
Anything else that you think is a good point to know about cash damming?
That I mean the biggest thing is like people hear about the strategy and people reach out to me sometimes. They're like, okay, I think I get it. I'm just going to go do it. Don't do this strategy without having a full, clear plan, and that you're going to stick to it, right? Like we originally talked about here, it's a tax and mortgage planning thing, or strategy, right? So if you're not disciplined with it and keeping the record very clear of what's non-tax deductible, tax deductible, how you're paying it down, if you're not working with a mortgage broker, an accountant, if you're adding any sort of investing in there, a financial advisor, if everyone's not on board and kind of working with a good power team on this, and you screw up a little bit and you put a little bit of money, I took some money out of the line and it's non-tax deductible, and then you get audited, everything can be reversed, right? So that's really the risk, but or something to be aware of. The con is that it's complicated, right? That's it. But in terms of like additional risk, there's very little, because the risk is buying the investment property. So especially if you already own an investment property, I see very little downside to you just changing the way that you're receiving rental income and paying the expenses.
Guys, if you're finding this useful, be sure to click that subscribe, share it with your friends, and hit that like. Let's continue. So let's take this a step further, go through a live example so people can see actually how much the savings would be. So I see you have an example here for $1.5 million property. So let's go through that.
Yep, exactly. So this is a client that we currently are just setting up with this structure. So they purchased this property recently. What we're going to do is a restructure on the mortgage. So we can see here $1.1 million mortgage, right? 30 years left on the amortization. As we talked about before, the true cost of this to them is, at least double that in principal and interest, $2.2 million, and they're in the highest tax bracket. So they're closer to having to earn $4.5 million to pay this thing off, right? That's a jumbo loan over a long time. But by utilizing the cash damming, we're going to add a readvanceable line of credit on here. The amount doesn't really matter because it's going to be readvanceable. They qualify to have about $50K on here, so that's what we're going to start the limit at. Their rental property total expenses down here, it's about just under $4,700, and this is basically a cash flow neutral property. They make $4,700 in rental income, right? So we've taken into account.
Wondering where this place is. That's amazing.
Yeah, it's honestly, I think it's even a little bit under market value.
Is that a detached?
Yeah, it's a detached.
And then they're renting main floor and basement together.
Yeah, exactly. So I think and the tenants have been there for a while, so they're actually, from what they've told me, fantastic tenants. So that's why they're happy with
there's a good rent
with the setup, right? Maintenance, insurance, and other things, property taxes, all of this is all included in here, as well as the mortgage payment that they're making now. So their expenses are just cash flow neutral, which is really cool to illustrate that you don't have to have a crazy cash flow positive property for this essentially to work, right? So what we're going to do is take the $4,700 per month, make the prepayment towards this mortgage. They make their regular mortgage payment that they would have had to make anyway, and then reborrow the money for the expenses, this $4,643, on the line of credit each month, okay? By doing that procedure, instead of just taking that rental income and paying the expenses, instead of a 30-year amortization, we're actually going to reduce their amortization to 21.17 years in this strategy. Another very important date here is the debt conversion date. So in just 10 years, 10.33 years, we're going to take that 1.1 million and convert it into a fully tax deductible investment loan. And I'll go into a second what that looks like, the exact numbers on that. But essentially, over that 21-year period, we're going to receive approximately $270,000 in total tax refunds that you wouldn't have otherwise received, and use that to prepay down the mortgage as well. Right?
That's so $270,000 in tax refunds.
Yeah, 270 over that 20-year period, and I'll show you again in a second what those numbers look like. But we're going to take that amount of money each. We're assuming that we're using that to pay the mortgage down faster as well, which is going to reduce the monthly payments by 107 monthly payments we're getting rid of, which would be around $635,000 in future payments they will not have to make, which means they're going to save over $1.3 million in pre-tax income savings. So this is just a really good example of like essentially a cash flow neutral property. And you're going to see figures that are very similar to this in terms of how quickly you pay the mortgage down on a cash flow neutral position on any amount. You know, we're using a big loan, big numbers here, but if you had a $500,000 mortgage, we'd still pay it off in 30 years or in 20 years instead of 30 if you have basically a cash flow neutral property with similar numbers, but they were all in half, right? So this isn't a strategy that's just for the ultra wealthy with huge mortgages and huge properties or lots of cash flow. It actually works for pretty much anybody with a rental property, right? Now, just to go into a little bit of further detail here, not to get too in the weeds in the numbers, but remember this date, this 10.33 years, okay? So down here, we've got all the figures and all the calculations. I could talk all day about this, but I'm really going to look at that 10.33 year date is here, the debt conversion date. This is the date that the mortgage is not fully eliminated, but moved over to the line of credit. So now you have a $780,000 fully tax deductible investment loan on your property instead of a mortgage. If you had just regularly paid your mortgage down as you were doing, right, you would actually still have $887,000 in a regular mortgage with no tax deductibility at that same timeline after 10 years. So not only have we made it fully tax deductible, we've actually reduced it by about $100,000. But in this column over here in M are the tax refunds we're getting. Now we're getting $22,000 as a tax refund. You're getting $25,000 in the following year. Then it starts to go down because then that's the date we actually start to pay down the line of credit with the same monthly payments that we were making before on the mortgage, but towards the line. Another really good point.
So how long does that take to pay down?
So then that's when we hit that year 21. Remember the mortgage freedom date?
Right.
So that's when all of the debt is paid off. So 21 years
as opposed to 30 years.
As opposed to 30. If you did it regularly, you'd still have $500,000 sitting on your mortgage after that same 21-year time period. So that's really the power of this strategy and utilizing those tax returns. Now, it's important to note that in this calculator, we're actually not even accounting for that. At this point, when it's fully tax deductible, when you have that $780,000 on the line, it's fully tax deductible. You could actually flip that back into a regular mortgage at a lower interest rate because you don't actually have to keep it on the line. You've fully converted it to tax deductibility in the eyes of the CRA. It's just a loan. It's like anything else. So you could actually pay it off faster than this. My calculator doesn't even account for that.
Yeah, because then you just refinance it as a mortgage.
Exactly. And you could put it at whatever amortization you want, essentially. You could put it at that 10, 11 years and still have the same trajectory, or you could theoretically extend it and continuously have that tax deductibility on the loan.
So that we're clear, when you say that debt conversion is completed, that means the entire mortgage is moved into the line of credit. At that point, the rate on the line of credit is usually higher, but you're only paying the interest-only payments.
Yeah,
but you're getting the payment, you're putting it towards that whole thing. So there's another 10 years that takes you to pay that off. Assuming at any point in time you're selling the property, what happens at that point?
So
not the primary, the investment property.
Yeah. So if you sell off the investment property, then you've converted some of the debt on to become tax deductible. You've used it for investment purposes. It's still tax deductible. You obviously cannot continue the cycle because you have no more rental income coming in. You can't keep converting it to nothing, right? You would also probably have a bunch of cash in hand. So you could use it to pay off the loan. You use it to buy another investment property and continue the cycle elsewhere. And you also bring up a good point of selling the primary residence, right? We actually didn't touch upon this. You 100% can just move the debt from property to property that's non-tax deductible and tax deductible if you were to buy and sell a new primary residence. So it's totally possible to start this strategy, be halfway through and say, well, we want to upgrade our house or downsize, right? Either way.
As long as there's enough equity left.
As long as there's, but you can always, if you're moving it from one primary to the next and you're increasing, you need more mortgage, where we just add more onto the non-tax deductible portion because it's for personal use. If you were moving and downsizing, well, then we'd pay off that non-tax deductible debt first and leave more of the tax deductible debt. So there's always a way that you can keep kind of doing the cycle of this.
So if they sold the property and for whatever reason, let's just say they were going to get a higher mortgage, or they just did a lateral move from this property, they went to another property, they want to get a higher mortgage. As you said, they could get like 2 lines of credit and then like buy another investment property with another one.
Yeah, it's all about just being very strict and careful on the structure.
And banks allow that?
Yeah, you can with the majority of the banks that we work with for this strategy that'll work the best. You can split your mortgage up into at least 3 components. Your mortgage can be in 3 components. Your line of credit can be in 3 components. Some banks allow for different rules, but that's generally the ones that we're working with. Some of them, another main lender that we use this for, it will allow unlimited components actually. So you could have 25, it'd be a headache probably, but you could have 25 different individual small lines of credit and have all sorts of different payments going on.
Let's go back to the savings. I just want to highlight that. So over 10 years, you're going to have close to $270,000 in savings, and the future payment saving, it takes into consideration the saving you have on prepayments, right? And then
exactly.
So that you pay down your mortgage in 20 years opposed to 30. That's the savings, $635. Is that what it is?
Exactly. So
with
over
the refunds?
Yeah, over the 21-year period, if you're using the refunds are over 21 years, right? Because you're going to continue to get those refunds as you convert the line, but then also when the line's fully converted, they still keep coming. The only difference is in the first 10 years of the strategy for this particular client, you'd be using those tax refunds to pay down the mortgage portion. Then once it's fully converted, you'd be using it to pay down the tax deductible debt, right? So over 21 years, you end up with around $270,000 in total tax refunds in this scenario, which would be $635,000 in payments that you would not be making, right? Based on the mortgage payment right now, which would be, you'd have to earn $1.3 million based on their tax bracket to have the money to make those payments, right? So the savings just like, and this is obviously a good example, but I've actually seen better. I've seen if there's more cash flow, right? And you actually, because this is a cash flow neutral property, essentially. If you had a cash flow positive property by $200, $300, $400, $500, and you want to be really aggressive and put all of that money into the strategy, then that's just further going to pay your mortgage down even faster.
So assuming, let's say someone's got a property multiplex with like 9% cap rate. So this math would be like, the debt conversion would be like 7 years.
It just accelerates. Like even I could even play with it right now. We'll say that there's $500 cash flow positive, right? So then we're putting that money into the strategy. Now we've reduced it to 9. Now we've paid off your mortgage 11 years faster, $1.6 million in savings, right? Now, what's also cool about this is say there was $500 of cash flow positivity in this scenario, and we drop it back to just having just enough money to cover the expenses in the scenario, because you don't actually have to put all the cash flow in if you don't want. What you could do is use the $500 extra cash flow to pay the regular mortgage payment down. So now you're still doing cash damming. You're still getting the benefits of paying the mortgage down faster, and you actually have less money out of pocket that you have to take from your income to pay your regular mortgage payment.
But that $500 would count towards your income.
Yeah,
that wouldn't be deductible.
No, it's still all the same, right? Like it's just that the strategy will not be as effective in paying the mortgage down faster.
Because you're using $500 less of your money.
Exactly, but you're using $500 to then reduce your actual regular mortgage payment that you'd have to pay. Because a lot of people will take their cash flow and use it for life expenses, right? They're like, I bought an investment property, I make $500 a month, so I use it for my kids' soccer or whatever, but paying my mortgage down, whatever. Yeah. So they're like, I don't want to put all the money into a prepayment. I actually need it to cover some expenses. That's fine. We can still use that money and just use the amount that covers the expenses and still come out on top.
I love it. They should be teaching this in school. I swear.
They should. It'd be maybe Mortgages 102. It's a little bit more of the advanced strategy.
No, I mean, like this is great, especially for a lot of people that are looking for a way. Because I always say it, for whoever is paying, let's say 4,000, 5,000, doesn't matter, whatever your mortgage is, you got to make, depending on your tax bracket, let's just call it like twice that much or like 70% more. So you pay the tax and then cover your mortgage. So with this, you get the benefit of writing that interest off, which you had no way of doing so otherwise for your primary resident.
100%. Well, it's like the way to look at it is this: you're already doing this. You're just not doing it the most efficient way that you could be. Right? You're paying the expenses. If you're cash flow negative too, there's another. We didn't get into that, but if you just take the negative cash flow, let's say you're negative $200 a month.
Let's run an example right now with cash flow negative.
Yeah. So all we would do, it's going to come out with the same result, right? So we had 43. 40. Oh, sorry, it was 4,700 initially. So 4,700. Okay, that's what this client has right now. If it was actually 4,500, right? One, it could actually eat the negative cash flow for a while and still come out ahead. So this can actually help you mitigate your negative cash flow position. However, you need to have enough limit in the line of credit because it's going to be not paying it down as much as you could. So that you could run into a bottleneck there. But if you were already accepting the fact that you're paying negative cash flow, you could just take the negative cash flow that you would have been paying the expenses with and use that to do a prepayment towards the mortgage and then reborrow the money from the line. So you're in the exact same position you were before, but now you're getting the benefits of the tax deductibility, right? Because you would have had the negative cash flow either way. You would have paid that out of your income, but instead of using it to pay the condo fees or whatever you're doing, you're using that as a prepayment towards your mortgage and reborrowing it from the line of credit.
Amazing. And can we talk about the assumption rental value appreciation? What are those numbers playing into?
So these are for like other kind of calculations in the strategy that we could get into, but we just like to play everything pretty conservatively.
Just to see how much your future value is.
Yeah, like if part of this, another part of this strategy would be if someone wants to buy a rental property, hold it for 10 years, sell it, realize the capital gains, and use that whole amount of money just to pay off the mortgage. I don't really, advise. I like to say hold your rental properties forever and appreciate and build generational wealth. But if someone was looking to maybe pay their mortgage off even faster, they could buy a property, hope that it appreciates by X amount, and then sell it and pay it off. So there's a couple other things we can play around with this.
I love it.
It's not a cut and dry. It's not a everything. Life is variable, right?
Yeah.
So this is subject to change a little bit, right? Like I say to people, but if it yields a positive result, if we see that you can pay your mortgage off 9 years, 10 years faster, even if we're off by a little bit and you pay your mortgage off 8 years faster, is that not still a win? That's amazing. It's like things will change and life happens and everything, but doing this versus not doing this has a massive cost to you at the end of the day.
Well, in case anyone needs more information about this or has any question, this is your guy. We're going to have his contact info down below. Give him a call. You can find him on Instagram. I think Instagram is your best.
Instagram, place. TikTok now. I'm blowing up on TikTok.
Yeah?
So,
Amazing. I got to follow you there. Oh, my God. Like, your videos are the best. So educational. So, yeah, definitely hit him up. Ask the questions because these are ways for you to it's not just about saving. It's about ways to spend in a better way. So this is it.
It's wealth building strategies, right? This is real mortgage and advanced mortgage and tax planning for wealth building strategies. It's not as simple just buy a rental property and hope it goes up and keep that little bit of cash flow. There's just better ways to do it. Like I said before, you're already doing this. If you have an investment property, you're just not doing it in the most efficient way.
Buddy, thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, man.
Always good to have you here. Guys, if you enjoyed it, please click that share button, subscribe, hit that little bell, and like it. And we'll see you next time. Have a great day.